There are stories that walk quietly beside us, unnoticed like a stray dog in the snow, until one day we stop, look again, and realize it was meant for us all along. This is one of those stories. In this episode on Veil Marks, we invite you into a tale not just about survival, but about second chances, quiet redemption, and the kind of love that heals what the world once broke. Stay with us until the end, because within this video lies a powerful life lesson, one that may just shift the way you see the world and yourself. Snow fell like whispers that had run out of words. Denver, in the grip of a deep winter night, felt more like a photograph than a living city. Still, colorless, frozen in a frame of wind and silence. Streetlights blinked against the cold, their orange halos casting long shadows over empty sidewalks and snow-dusted benches. The few cars that passed left trails of tired noise, swallowed quickly by the hush. Riley Ann Carter, just 16 and already old in too many ways, moved through the night like someone who had learned to vanish. Her boots, once white, were now grayed and cracked, the soles patched with duct tape that barely held. A faded army green coat, several sizes too big, draped over her small frame, and beneath its frayed collar peeked the ends of a wool scarf, her only real source of warmth. Her face, half covered by a knit beanie, was sharp with angles carved from hunger and nights without shelter. But her eyes, deep, clear, and always scanning, remained alive. She trusted nothing but motion. Stopping was for people who had somewhere to stop. Riley hadn't had a place like that since she was 13. She'd learned to walk with purpose even when she had none, to look ahead so no one would look at her too long. If someone did stop her, she kept her voice low and her sentences short. People were less dangerous when you made yourself invisible. She crossed a narrow street near an abandoned grocery store, her breath visible in broken bursts. Her fingers were stiff, curled inside thin gloves that had once belonged to a church donation bin. It was nearly midnight, and she was looking for a place to sleep that wasn't the usual concrete slab behind the laundromat. Someone had already claimed that spot. The parking lot behind an old discount furniture store caught her eye. It was fenced off, half buried in snowdrifts, and littered with discarded pallets and cracked plastic chairs. But tucked in the back corner, partially shielded by a broken storage container, it offered shelter from the wind. She was halfway across the lot when she heard it, a soft, broken sound, like a breath caught in a sob. Riley froze. She listened. There it was again. Not a cat, not human, deeper. Sadder. She turned, scanning the shadows between a dumpster and a stack of collapsed cardboard. That's when she saw it. A dog, a golden retriever, or something close to it. Large, dirty, with matted fur and a body curled in on itself as if trying to disappear. One of its front legs stuck out at a strange angle. It trembled violently, breath rapid and shallow, but its eyes were open, watching her. Riley stepped closer, slowly, like she might scare the world away if she moved too fast. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It just looked at her, with eyes that seemed too tired to ask for help, but too loyal to stop hoping. "Hey," she whispered, crouching a few feet away. "You okay, buddy?" The dog didn't move. It just blinked once. Riley's heart clenched in a way she hadn't felt in months. She didn't name things anymore. Names meant you might lose something. But this wasn't something you could walk away from. She glanced down at her scarf. It wasn't much. It was barely enough for her, but the way the dog's body shook made her own shivers feel selfish. "Damn it," she muttered, already unraveling the scarf. She moved in closer, gently draped it over the dog's back. It flinched, then settled. Riley sank down beside it, knees pulled to her chest, back against the storage container. The cold seeped into her bones like it had been waiting all day. "You're gonna owe me big for this," she murmured, more to herself than the dog. "Like, I don't know, save my life kinda big." The dog pressed its side into her hip. A low, grateful sigh left its body, and Riley instinctively reached out, letting her hand rest gently on its head. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe because it didn't pull away. Minutes passed. The wind screamed past them, but didn't touch the space they shared. Riley looked up at the sky, thick with clouds, no stars, and whispered into the void, not for the first time, "Where are you, Mom?" No one answered. But the dog didn't move either. That counted for something. She looked back at him again. Really looked. That's when she saw it. On the dog's left hind leg, just above the joint, a scar ran in a curved line, jagged but distinct. At the top, the skin formed the faint shape of a 5-pointed star. Riley's breath caught. Not because she recognized the dog, but because she recognized that shape. Her mom used to tell her bedtime stories, not from books, but ones she made up. Fantasies about the door that wasn't there before, a magical place that only appeared when you were most alone. The symbol for the door, Mom had said, was always a star with broken edges. It meant the path was hidden, but it existed. Riley had almost forgotten about those stories. Almost. She reached out and touched the scar lightly. The dog didn't move. "Are you the door?" she whispered, half laughing, half crying. "Because I've been looking." She leaned back against the metal wall, closed her eyes, let the silence settle over them like another layer of snow. It was the first night in a long time that she didn't dream about running, and for the first time in even longer, she didn't feel completely alone. There were some mornings when Grant Weller couldn't remember what day it was. Not because of age or illness, his mind was still sharp in its own stubborn way, but because days didn't feel different anymore. They came and went with the same quiet gray, and he let them. 65 winters had passed in his lifetime, and none of them felt colder than the last 3. Not in temperature, in silence. The house sat at the edge of an old farm road just outside of Boulder, Colorado. 2 stories, faded siding, porch steps that creaked no matter how slow you walked. Grant had fixed everything in that house over the years. Leaky pipes, loose shingles, a broken furnace. But there were 2 things he never touched. The green shutters Helen had painted herself, and the upright piano in the front room, still bearing her fingerprints in invisible dust. Helen had passed quietly in her sleep 3 winters ago. Cancer. It moved fast. She didn't fight it. She told him once that she was tired of fighting everything. "I've earned some peace," she said, with that soft half-smile she wore when she was already halfway to heaven. Their son Tyler had gone not long after. He hadn't died of disease. He died under a truck. A weather-worn pickup had skidded on black ice on a stretch of highway near Fort Collins and slammed into Tyler's car head-on. Tyler had been 29, a canine handler, decorated, disciplined, patient as saints, and twice as loyal. He had trained therapy dogs for veterans with PTSD and children with autism. He loved animals because they never pretended to be anything they weren't. Grant had raised Tyler on 3 rules: tell the truth, keep your word, and take care of what's yours. And then Tyler was gone, and nothing was Grant's anymore. The funeral was military. Crisp flag, folded triangles, salutes. Empty chairs. What haunted Grant most wasn't the sound of taps, but the way the leash in his garage, Tyler's leash, had nobody to hold it anymore. He kept the leash. And he kept the box. A small cedar container, hand-carved with Tyler's name burned into the lid. Inside were dog tags, an old photograph, and a patch from Tyler's unit. Grant hadn't opened it in over a year, but he hadn't thrown it away either. He lived alone now, in the house they'd filled with life. He drank coffee black and let it go cold. He sat on the porch sometimes, just to hear the wind move through the trees. And he didn't play the piano. He didn't speak to many people either, except for the occasional check-in call from Ramona Caldwell, a former vet tech turned therapy director who had worked with Tyler in his last few years. Ramona always had the kind of voice that made you feel like she was standing right next to you, even over a scratchy phone line. She never asked too many questions. That's why he still picked up when she called. One evening, just after 7, Grant sat at the kitchen table, a mug in hand, and no appetite for anything but silence. Outside, the sun had long disappeared, leaving a sky like slate. The wind pressed against the windows, but inside the house, it was still. His phone buzzed once on the table, a message from Ramona. "You need to see this." Grant squinted, tapped the link, and waited for the video to load. The screen lit up with a shaky vertical frame. It showed a subway platform, likely Denver, flickering lights, a cracked concrete floor, and near the far wall, a figure curled up beneath a coat too big for her frame. A girl, teenager maybe. Beside her, a golden retriever, dirty and trembling but alert. She was humming, barely, just enough to hear something like a lullaby, rough from cold and sadness. The dog didn't bark or whimper. It simply leaned into her, calm, protective, as if this girl was the only thing worth guarding in the world. Grant paused the video. Something inside him shifted, the way the dog stayed still, the subtle alertness. The posture, it was trained. He knew that stillness. He had seen it in Tyler's dogs, that quiet readiness. That was no street mutt. And that girl, her eyes weren't scared. They were tired. The kind of tired that came after you'd outrun everything but your own ghosts. He watched the video again. This time, he looked only at the girl's hands, wrapped around the dog like an anchor. And then again, focused on the dog's gaze, locked on the space around her like a sentry. His chest tightened. He closed the video and stood up too quickly, almost knocking the chair over. He walked to the living room, stood in front of the piano, then looked away. Back in the kitchen, he opened the drawer next to the sink and pulled out the cedar box. His fingers hovered over the lid. He didn't open it. Just held it. "I couldn't save my boy," he whispered to the stillness. "But maybe I still get to keep my promise to someone." He picked up the phone again. Texted Ramona. "Do you know who she is?" A pause. "Not yet." "But I'm looking." Grant stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without ceremony, he poured out the cold coffee, rinsed the mug, and set it in the rack to dry. He didn't know why. It just felt right. Outside, the wind shifted direction, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something he'd thought buried for good. Not hope exactly, but maybe the shape of it. Riley didn't hate people. Not exactly. She just didn't trust them. There was a time, not so long ago, when she still believed adults could be safe places. That they knew what they were doing, that someone, anyone, might catch her if the ground gave way. But those ideas were buried now, under layers of bruised memories and whispered promises that turned into closed doors. The last adult she trusted was her mother, and her mother died on a Wednesday. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just a ride to the grocery store after school. Rain had started that afternoon, light at first, then heavy and unrelenting. Riley remembered watching the drops race each other across the passenger window. Her mom had laughed at something Riley said, something about the way bananas always went brown before you wanted them to, and then the light turned green. The sound of the truck, the glass, the screaming, the silence. Her mother never made it out of the hospital. Riley did. And that was where her real loneliness began. After the accident, social services placed her with a foster family that smelled like sour milk and unwashed laundry. The house was tight, filled with shouting and slammed doors. They called it temporary, but it lasted 9 months. 9 months of cold spaghetti dinners, being told she was too quiet, and learning how to make herself disappear in plain sight. She ran away the first time in early fall, got caught, sent back. She ran away again before winter. This time, she stayed gone. Now, Riley lived everywhere and nowhere. Train stations, church basements, the back corner of a 24-hour laundromat. She figured out which library branches didn't ask questions, which cafes had broken cameras, which bus routes you could ride for 90 minutes on one transfer. She wasn't a thief, though she'd taken food more than once. She wasn't violent, though she carried a key between her knuckles when walking alone at night. And she wasn't lost, not in the way people thought. Riley knew exactly where she was. What she didn't know was where she could ever belong. In her backpack, worn at the seams, she carried 3 things: a half-empty bottle of aspirin, a roll of quarters wrapped in a sock, and a small red notebook with a broken elastic strap. The notebook was for her mother. Every night, wherever she landed, Riley pulled it out and wrote a letter. She never reread them, never tore them out. She just wrote, like casting messages into the void and hoping someone might hear. Dear Mom, today I saw a girl who looked like me on a cereal box. I stared at her too long and made the clerk nervous. I didn't mean to. Dear Mom, someone gave me a sandwich. I didn't say thank you. I couldn't. My throat locked up again. I'm sorry. Dear Mom, I think I found a door. It has fur. She had written that last one just 3 nights ago, because of Blaze. Blaze didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't pull or beg or run. From the first moment Riley had sat beside him, in the cold near the furniture store lot, the dog had simply been there, like he was always meant to be. He hadn't judged her for shaking, hadn't recoiled from her thin, bony arms or the smell of 4 days without a shower. He had leaned into her and closed his eyes. That was enough. Since then, Blaze followed her everywhere. He limped, his front leg stiff from an old injury maybe, but he never let her out of his sight. When they slept beneath the overhang behind the Mission downtown, Blaze curled in front of her, like a barrier between her and the world. When she walked through unfamiliar alleys or empty lots, Blaze stayed close to her side, ears perked, ready. And when the 3 older boys had cornered her near the train tracks 2 nights ago, shouting things she didn't understand and laughing like it was a game, Blaze had stepped forward. No growl. No bark, just a quiet, deliberate stand. They didn't stay long after that. One of them called him a crazy mutt and threw a rock. Blaze didn't flinch. He didn't move until they were gone. Riley had dropped to her knees beside him afterward, gripping his face, checking for blood. There wasn't any, just a twitch in his leg and those tired golden eyes staring back at her. "You're not supposed to do that," she whispered. "You're hurt." He had licked her cheek. No human had ever made her feel safer. She didn't know anything about training dogs, didn't know what sit commands or clicker cues were, but Blaze listened to her voice. He responded to her eyes. When she cried, he leaned his head against her chest and stayed perfectly still. When she couldn't speak, he simply walked a little closer. He understood her in the way adults never had. That night, in the basement of an abandoned church, she pulled out the red notebook. The page was damp, but still writable. She clicked her pen twice, then began. "Dear Mom, Blaze scared off some jerks today. I think he thinks he's my bodyguard." "I guess I think that too. He doesn't talk, but somehow I know what he's saying. It's like he's the only one who doesn't make me feel like I'm a problem that needs fixing. He got between me and the world again, just like you used to." She paused. Then, in smaller letters, "I miss you, but I think maybe you sent him." She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. Outside, the wind moved through the stained glass remnants like a whisper she could almost hear. And beside her, Blaze lifted his head, sighed, and laid it gently across her lap, like a promise made without words. The wind had changed again. It always did before something bad happened. Riley had come to notice it. The way the air felt tighter, how the city sounds got meaner, sharper, closer. That night, even Blaze seemed restless. His ears twitched with every gust of wind, and he stuck closer to her side than usual, his gait slower, heavier. Blaze had been limping worse all day. He hadn't eaten more than a few bites of the sandwich she'd swiped from a deli dumpster, and his eyes had started to dull around the edges, like the light inside was flickering. Riley tried not to panic, but fear was already spreading in her chest like a slow fire. They were walking the edge of a parking structure near the edge of town, looking for someplace quiet to sleep, when the voices came. 3 of them. Boys, maybe 17, maybe older. One had a hood pulled low, the other 2 wore second-hand army jackets. She didn't know their names, only their tone. Casual at first, then sharper. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called, stepping into her path. "What's a girl like you doing with a dog like that?" Riley's grip on Blaze's leash tightened. He didn't growl, but his muscles tensed. She tried to step around, but the second boy blocked her way. "You training him for someone?" the third said, eyes gleaming. "That's a purebred retriever, ain't he?" "He's sick," Riley snapped. "He's not for sale." "Didn't say anything about buying," the first boy muttered, stepping closer. Blaze moved between them. Even limping, he was all instinct. He planted himself between Riley and the boys, shoulders low, eyes locked on the threat. But his legs trembled under the strain, and Riley could feel it. He couldn't take a fight. "Not like this. Let us look at him," the tallest boy said, reaching out. Riley didn't think. She threw herself in front of Blaze, hands up. "Get away!" One boy laughed, and the tallest one grabbed her arm. She kicked, screamed, tried to twist away. Blaze lunged, growling now, his bark ragged but fierce. He sank his teeth into a denim sleeve just enough to make a point. "Crazy mutt!" the boy yelled, stumbling back. He raised a boot, too fast, and Riley screamed, but the boot never landed. A sudden glare of light flooded the alley. A vehicle's headlights. Tires crunched against gravel. Then, a deep voice cut through the night like a whip. "Back off. This dog is not yours, and she's not yours either." The boys froze. The Jeep's door slammed. A figure stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a trucker cap pulled low. He moved with the steady gait of someone who'd seen enough of the world to know exactly when to stop being polite. "You deaf?" he said, louder now. "I said walk away, or I call every badge within 10 miles. The boys hesitated, weighing something behind their eyes. Then, with the muttered curses of boys who'd been outmatched, they backed off. The tall one spat on the ground near Blaze before disappearing into the dark. Riley clutched Blaze tighter, her heart thudding in her ears. She turned slowly, every instinct screaming that the man would call the cops, call a shelter, do what grown-ups always did when they thought they were helping. But the man didn't move closer. He just knelt on one knee, a few feet away, and looked at the dog. Then at her. "You all right?" he asked. Riley didn't answer. He nodded like he understood. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small thermos. He placed it gently on the ground, along with a folded slip of paper. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just want you to have this." She stared at the objects. He backed away. "If you're ever cold again," he added, voice low, almost like a secret, "that door might be real." Then he got in his Jeep and drove off. Riley didn't move for a long time. When she finally picked up the thermos, it was still warm. The paper had an address and a name written in shaky, all-capital letters. Grant Weller, Dusty Ridge Farm, Highway 29, mile marker 17. She didn't go the next day, or the one after, but Blaze didn't get better. By the third night, his fever had worsened. He was panting hard, trembling, eyes glassy. Riley soaked a rag in cool water from a diner restroom and laid it on his belly. It helped for a few minutes. Then he stopped standing. That was when she knew she didn't have a choice. It took her 5 hours to get to Dusty Ridge Farm. 2 bus rides, 1 stretch on foot. She carried Blaze wrapped in a wool blanket, cradled like a child. She walked until her feet went numb, until her back ached from the weight of hope and fur and fear. The farm was quiet, modest. She reached the porch and stood there, shivering, unsure. Before she could knock, the door opened. Grant stood there, backlit by the glow of a low-burning fireplace. He looked at her, then at Blaze. He didn't ask any questions. He just stepped aside. "Come in," he said. And for the first time in a long while, Riley walked through a door that someone had left open, just for her. The first few nights at Dusty Ridge Farm were quiet in a different way, not like the silence of bus stations or abandoned churches. Not the kind of silence that came from being forgotten. This quiet was warm. It had shape. It breathed in the wind chimes outside the back porch, in the slow creak of the floorboards, in the soft snoring of an old dog sleeping safely by a fireplace. Blaze was getting better. It hadn't happened overnight, but the change was there. Grant had cleaned the infected wound on his leg, administered antibiotics, and built a small bed from folded blankets in the corner of the living room. He never said much while he worked, just hummed low under his breath, hands steady, gaze focused. Riley had expected questions. "Where are your parents? Why are you out here alone? Who taught you to survive like that?" But Grant never asked. Instead, he left food on the table, offered clean towels, and showed her how to measure Blaze's temperature with a forehead thermometer. The rest came slowly, in tiny pieces. He taught her how to feed Blaze bone broth by syringe, how to check his paws for cracks, how to wrap a bandage so it wouldn't unravel by morning. Riley didn't say thank you. She wasn't sure she knew how anymore. But she stayed. She started to learn the rhythm of the farm, the kettle that whistled at 6, the way the frost melted from the east-facing windows first, the chirp of barn swallows that nested in the rafters even in winter. There was a peace in it, like a song without words. On the third morning, Grant handed her a thin rope and said, "Come outside." She followed him, still wary, clutching Blaze's leash. The snow had softened under the morning sun, crusty on top but melting beneath. Grant led her to the far field, where a ring of fencing enclosed a wide, packed-down stretch of earth. "Blaze needs exercise," he said. "But more than that, he needs focus. Dogs carry memory in their bones. The good ones remember how to protect, even when they're hurting." He paused, looked at her. "So do people." He showed her how to use hand signals, how to give commands with tone instead of volume, how to praise instead of control. Blaze responded slowly at first, still favoring his leg. But when Riley crouched low and whispered, "Come on, you got this," the retriever lifted his head, tail wagging once. They trained every morning after that. Riley began to speak more, small words, short sentences. She asked questions about the dogs Grant used to train. He told her about Tyler, about the dogs his son had worked with in war zones and at home. He didn't say how Tyler died, and she didn't ask. They understood certain things didn't need words. Inside the house, Riley explored cautiously. The rooms were simple, worn, but full of life. Family photos lined the hallway. There was a needlepoint piece that read, "Mend what you can, forgive what you can't." In the far room, past the laundry, she found the piano. It was covered in dust, but not forgotten. The bench still creaked when she sat. The keys were slightly yellowed but intact. She touched them like they might shatter. Her mother had taught her to play. Only one piece, really. A lullaby they used to call the Sunday Song. Riley hadn't heard it in years, but her fingers remembered pieces of it, the way fingers remember scars. She began to play. It wasn't perfect. She hit wrong notes. The rhythm was off, but the shape of the melody returned, halting and soft, like a memory trying to become a voice again. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. Grant stood at the hallway entrance, one hand resting on the doorframe. He didn't say anything. The song Riley was playing, he knew it. Not just the notes, but the feeling. Helen used to play it every Sunday morning, before church, before breakfast, before anything else. He had thought he'd never hear it again. But here it was, broken and beautiful, echoing from the same piano. She played to the end, fingers trembling, then sat in silence, unsure if she'd made a mistake. Grant cleared his throat. "You know that piece?" he asked. "My mom taught me," Riley said. "She used to say it helped her heart breathe." Grant nodded slowly. He stepped into the room but didn't sit. "She played it too," he said. "My Helen." Neither of them said much after that. But when Grant walked out, he didn't go far. Just sat on the porch with Blaze and watched the wind move through the trees. Later that night, as Riley curled beside Blaze, she opened her red notebook and wrote, "Dear Mom, I played our song today." It sounded like home, even though I wasn't. Down the hallway, in his own room, Grant sat at the edge of his bed, staring at an old photo of Helen with her fingers on the piano keys. He whispered to the quiet, just loud enough to be heard by the memory. "She found the song, and maybe I found my reason." Spring came slowly to Dusty Ridge Farm, not in flowers or warmth, not yet, but in softer winds, and the way snow no longer stayed past noon. The birds returned earlier each morning, and Blaze, for the first time since Riley had found him, walked without a limp. He was whole again. So was something inside Riley. It didn't happen all at once. Healing never does. But day by day, the walls she'd built began to thin, She laughed a little louder, slept a little deeper, wrote fewer pages in her red notebook, and more often just watched the world through the kitchen window, sipping tea while Blaze dozed at her feet. Grant noticed. He didn't say it, but he started leaving small tasks for her to do without being asked. Carrying firewood, feeding the hens, brushing down the horses. She did them all, not because she owed him, but because the work felt like hers, like proof she was becoming part of something again. Then came the visits. It was Ramona Caldwell who suggested it. "She's got a natural bond with that dog," Ramona had said over coffee one afternoon. "You ever think about letting them visit the center? You know how much the residents light up when they see a golden." Grant hadn't even finished his coffee before nodding. "Let's try." Their first visit was to a local senior care center. Riley had been nervous, palms sweating, shoulders stiff, but Blaze was calm, as if he'd been doing this his whole life. He walked from room to room, tail wagging gently, head tilted in quiet understanding. And somehow, watching him made Riley braver too. They went back the next week. Then to a nearby elementary school, where kids with autism lined up to touch Blaze's ears and whisper their secrets into his fur. He listened to each one, as if they were the only voice that mattered. But it was at the VA hospital where everything changed. It was a quiet afternoon. Riley and Blaze had just finished a round of room visits and were about to head back to the car when they passed a man in a wheelchair by the sunroom window. His skin was pale, stretched thin across weathered bones. He wore an old combat jacket, one hand resting on a blanket across his knees. His eyes followed them as they passed. Blaze stopped. The man looked down, then slowly extended a hand. Blaze stepped forward, pressing his head gently against the man's palm. The man didn't smile. Instead, his lip trembled. "He's got the eyes," he murmured. "Same as my buddy in Nam." Same weight, same kind of quiet. He closed his eyes and exhaled. He never let go either. Riley blinked hard. She hadn't expected to cry, but the tears came anyway, fast and quiet, falling onto her shoes. Later that evening, back at the farm, she sat by the fireplace with Blaze curled against her. The air smelled of pine smoke and cinnamon tea. Grant returned from the barn, hands cold and calloused, and without a word he handed her a small wooden box. She looked at him, confused. He just nodded. "Go ahead." Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single silver key. Etched into the surface, in careful lettering, were the words, "To the door that wasn't there before." Riley held it like it might vanish. "I thought maybe," Grant began, then paused. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the floor. "I thought maybe you deserved a door you could choose, not one you had to run through." She didn't speak. "I can't replace what you lost," he added, his voice quieter now. "I know that, and I'm not trying to. But if you'll have me, I'd like to be your last stop." He said it simply. No drama, no pressure, just an offering. Riley stared at the key. Her fingers shook, but not from fear. She looked up, met his eyes. There was no pity in them, no sadness, just a quiet steadiness, the kind that made you believe the earth would hold no matter how hard the wind blew. She nodded, not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long while, Riley didn't feel like she had to write a letter to explain it. Not to herself. Not to her mother, because she knew somewhere deep in her bones that her mother had already heard. 3 years later, the barn doors stood wide open. The wind moved gently across the hill, lifting the chimes strung from the porch rafters, and sending a soft melody across the field. A hand-painted sign swung just above the entrance. Blaze's door, a place to begin again. Inside, laughter echoed. It wasn't the loud, careless kind. It was the tentative, surprised kind. The sound of kids who weren't used to laughing at all. A boy with a nervous smile was brushing a collie mix named Whisper. In the corner, a girl with purple braids sat on a beanbag, reading aloud to a three-legged mutt sprawled across her lap. The walls were warm with soft light. The shelves were lined with notebooks, dog toys, and cups of paintbrushes. At the piano, Riley sat with a boy named Theo. He was 10 on the spectrum and had barely spoken when he first arrived. Now, his fingers tapped carefully at the keys, one note at a time, the beginnings of Twinkle Twinkle forming under her patient guidance. "That's it," she said gently. "Feel the rhythm, not just the sound." Theo looked up at her, uncertain. "You're not wrong," Riley added with a smile. "You're just learning." Blaze was curled nearby, watching it all through tired, golden eyes. He was older now, grayer around the muzzle. His walks were slower, his naps longer. But every morning, he rose when Riley did. He greeted each new child like they were the most important person in the world. And when Riley played the old song on the piano, the one her mother had taught her, Blaze always stirred, even if just to lift his head and sigh, as if remembering something sacred. The center wasn't big, just the converted barn, the original farmhouse, and a stretch of fenced pasture behind it. But it held more than rooms and roofs. It held stories, healing, new chances. They didn't call it a shelter. Riley had been clear about that from the beginning. "We don't rescue," she always said. "We don't fix. We open a door. And if you're ready, you walk through it." She had been 19 for just a few months, still young by most standards, but she carried a kind of wisdom people twice her age couldn't fake. It was in the way she listened, the way she sat in silence with kids who didn't know how to speak their pain, the way she let the dogs come to her in their own time, offering trust instead of training. She still wrote music, usually in the early mornings, before the kids arrived. Her melodies had changed, softer now, more layered. Sometimes Grant would pause outside the music room, one hand resting on the frame, eyes misting. He never interrupted, but he always stayed until the last note. Grant lived in the small guest cottage behind the main house now. He kept the garden growing, tomatoes, herbs, a stubborn apple tree that refused to quit. The kids liked to sit with him in the afternoons while he told stories about Vietnam, about Tyler and Helen, about the way even pain could be passed down with love if you held it gently enough. He called Riley his granddaughter now. Not officially. There was no paper, no courtroom declaration, but when she introduced him that way, Grant never corrected her. And when she leaned her head against his shoulder during thunderstorms, he always wrapped an arm around her, like it had always belonged there. One rainy afternoon, Riley sat alone in the music room. Blaze lay by the open door, his breathing slow but steady. She had a fresh page in her journal, her pen poised. Her old red notebook, the one she used to write to her mother, was now kept in the bookshelf behind the piano, pages filled edge to edge. She hadn't written in it in months. But today felt different. She began slowly, letting the words come. "Dear Mom, I opened a door today. Not for me, for someone else. A girl named Cassidy, who cried when Whisper licked her face. She looked at me like she couldn't believe she was allowed to be okay. We're not saving anyone, but we're here, and I think that's what matters." She paused, then smiled. "I found the door, Mom. Turns out, It was me all along." She set the pen down. In the distance, laughter floated across the yard. Someone was trying to teach a beagle to roll over, and someone else had just fallen in the mud. A sprinkler sputtered to life. Grant called for someone to help him pick basil. Theo played a shaky version of Twinkle Twinkle on his own. Riley stood up and walked to the doorway. Blaze looked up at her, his tail thumping once. "You ready, old man?" she asked. He rose, slow but steady, and walked beside her across the threshold. The door didn't creak. The sunlight was soft. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly as it should. As the sun sets over the quiet fields of Dusty Ridge, the final notes of this story linger not just in memory, but in meaning. What began with a girl and a dog shivering in the dark ends with a home that opens its doors to others like them. Riley, once voiceless and wandering, now speaks through music, through kindness, through a sanctuary named after the very soul who saved her, Blaze. And Grant, once broken by grief, now lives to pass down stories, wisdom, and a garden full of second chances. Not because life forgot him, but because it remembered. Here on Veil Marks, we don't just tell stories. We unveil them, layer by layer, like veils pulled back from the eyes of the heart. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the warmth that still exists in a cold world, then we invite you to leave a comment. Share your thoughts, share your own story. Subscribe to Veil Marks, not just to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, but to become part of a growing circle of souls who still believe in compassion, in dignity, and in the power of connection between people and their faithful companions. Each subscription is not just a number, it's a breath of motivation for us to keep creating stories that matter, stories that lift, that heal, that honor the quiet heroism in everyday life. As Maya Angelou once said, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." If this story made you feel something, hope, sorrow, joy, maybe all at once, then its purpose has been fulfilled. Before you go, take a moment. Look around your own life. Is there someone, or some dog, who once opened a door you didn't know you needed? Perhaps it's time you become that door for someone else. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. And remember, the most beautiful marks we leave in this world are often the ones nobody sees. We are Veil Marks, and this is just the beginning.